Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of the NEMA conference. I'm Dan Yeager, NEMA's Executive Director, and once again, I'm really happy you're here. Our theme today is combating climate change, and our keynoter, Sarah Sutton, is one of the country's experts on how climate and museums have mutual impact. Sarah is the principal of Sustainable Museums and is the cultural sector lead of We Are Still In, a multi-sector effort to counteract the current administration's effort to remove America from the Paris Agreement on global climate change. Sarah will be speaking to us on how climate change intersects with the pandemic, economic peril, and social justice at the forefront of our attention today. As with our other keynote presentations, Sarah's was pre-recorded, but she's with us here live and can answer your questions and comments via the chat feature. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Sutton.
Hello, my friends. So it's a little crazy that we're doing things this way with video and all, but it's pretty great for me to be with you. It's an opportunity I hadn't expected, and I'm delighted. Thank you. It's also a little crazy that we're having this conversation today after the election, though much of it was written before the election. I've added a postscript for sure. You can imagine, at least that for me as a climate person, this election had lots of impact on me, and that this outcome is more hopeful to me than a re-election outcome would have been. But it doesn't change the fact that we have these crises still dominating our worlds, dominating our present and dominating our future. There is work to be done. So on that tired yet grateful note, let me begin. This talk is front-loaded with a bunch of information and a few charts, but it's mostly story. I used to avoid that approach because it feels so self-centered, but of course, it's the only story I have the right to tell. If I told you about all the cool green projects I'd see, well, I'd miscredit someone or overlook a critical piece or a critical story, or I get the history wrong or something. So instead, I will tell you what I'm seeing, and I hope that you will find things of value in the stories, in my experience, and that will help you feel more encouraged about your path forward. But an extra note for anyone in the audience currently unmoored from your museum. Your awareness, your skills, your abilities, and your personal agency is still in you. Even if your commitment or opportunity has suffered serious blows during 2020, your values, your wishes, your hopes are still in you, and just, well, maybe they're a bit clearer, maybe they're more urgent. They're going to make themselves increasingly visible, and you will eventually find the path forward. So even though I say during this talk museum, I mean all of you who are listening. So there are 4 parts to this talk. First, where I was when COVID affected my climate work. Second, what these 4 apocalypses have in common. Third, the idea of friends from before, and then a post-election postscript for some scene setting for the role of the cultural sector in climate action nationally and internationally. Okay, for the first part, where was I when COVID affected my climate work? Isolation began when I got back from Stemming the Tide, the program at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. It was a talk about intersection of climate change and cultural heritage, and I was all charged up. I had said at the dialogue presentation that Friday evening that though I feel as if the museum field has only been crawling forward on green practice over the last decade, that finally in the last few years, I've seen a great acceleration. However, after that trip and being exposed to so many people, even though we practiced elbow bumps and we didn't hug each other, I'd then flown all the way across the country, and so I isolated myself for 2 weeks, thinking I'd come out of it soon. Well, during that isolation, the We Are Still In Executive Committee had a meeting in which we talked about what was our response to the COVID crisis. We agreed that we should pause our public calls for climate action. That if we went on and on about climate change during this health crisis, we'd sound tone deaf. We all, of course, agreed. What that meant is that We Are Still In, which is the largest coalition of supporters of the Paris Agreement anywhere in the world, was going to stop its work. So the major organizers for all the sectors in the US on climate action, that's mayors and governors, tribal nations, businesses and investors, higher education, healthcare, faith-based, and we cultural institutions, even we thought we just couldn't press on when all of us were beginning to recognize the seriousness of what was happening. We went silent, and it was excruciating. But then we all started to notice something. It sounded like much of what we saw in the COVID struggle was familiar. And then George Floyd was killed and the race protests started, and it sounded familiar again. By June, the climate folk weren't silent anymore. The lessons from decades of climate advocacy had striking parallels with what we were seeing. And the two most important were that facts don't change mind and that actions drive hope. And for both of those reasons, museums are smack in the middle of this work. But also, since science, data, language, politics, history, and human nature are all mixed up in the problems and the solutions, museums are smack in the middle of the spaces where communities must cope with and overcome these crises. With our missions to help people and communities thrive, we would be derelict in our duty if we didn't learn fast enough and work hard enough to make a difference during these struggles. What we climate folk and environmentalists have learned or not from 50 gosh darn years of trying to change public behavior, it can all be useful in addressing the changes in behavior and attitudes that we need to manage COVID-19, to create an economic recovery, and to address inequality. And here's the kicker. The regular non-climate folks are learning things too as they fight COVID-19, and they create a recovery, and they try to reduce inequality. And everything they're learning applies to what we need in the climate action fight. There are parallels in how what we're experiencing right now with COVID and how it has exposed inequality, affected the economy, and threatened health. Seriously, this is like watching all of the bad actors in a climate change documentary, but it's all sped up and it's happening right now. So Katharine Hayhoe, she's an awesome climate scientist and a climate communicator. She describes climate change this way, really simple terms. It's real, it's happening now, and we caused it. Okay, about the 4 current crises, I would say they're real, they're happening now, and museums can influence the outcome. Now, I didn't say fix, because you never fix a dynamic system. That would be an oxymoron. And climate, society, and legal systems are systems. You can disrupt them and disturb them, as is what is happening right now, or as I like to approach it, you can influence the system. So what is the role of museums in influencing the system? Okay, so get ready. Here come the hard part. You have to make some comparisons here. I want you to match the context that you see here to the crises that we're experiencing. So there are these 6, and then these 3. So of those 9, which ones go with health, economics, race, or climate. They all go together, don't they? The overlaps are stunning, and every single one is an opportunity to apply the lessons learned on one to the others. Okay, so let's look at it in more of a layout. There are two charts here to show the comparisons. So if we take the first one here, so you notice on the left, this is a list of experiences. The one that follows is going to be a list of responses. So if we take the near-term threats of climate change and consider them, it's unevenly distributed. I'm experiencing wildfires, you're experiencing storms and flooding. So those threats are unevenly distributed. Same if we think about health. I am able to protect myself and to isolate. People who have essential jobs and people who live in co-housing or in tight family units, they don't have the chance to isolate in the way I do. Economically, I'm a gig worker. I've got 10 jobs. I'm not fired from all 10 jobs, so my financial situation isn't affected. But for somebody who has one job and that one job was threatened, they are having a different economic experience than I am. And the race situation, my experience is not the same as somebody else's who is not white. So you can see how the threats are unevenly distributed. And you can work down all of the rest of this chart in order to understand how the experience of one crisis has relationships to the experience of the others. Certainly, they're all politically charged. Certainly, they all involve power plays. Now, let's look at the next one. What about the response? Science and data transparency matter. Innovation and creativity is critical. History has examples. All of these things tell us something about how the response is the same applied across all four in related ways. So what can museums contribute to this? Well, all the things that we're learning about timing, practices, communication, and human behavior in one crisis applies to the others. But most importantly, what climate folks call multisolving and others call intersectionality mean that sometimes we can find a solution that addresses multiple concerns at once. In fact, often we find them that way. And those solutions have more of an impact and are more self-sustaining than single problem, single approach solutions. The idea is to design responses and plans that address multiple issues at once. So if you're at your museum, how the heck do you take all of that and align it with what you're doing? I'm not saying that everybody has to address every crisis or every part of a crisis. We still function from what is our mission, what are our resources, what are our responsibilities. And from there, we make choices about how we're going to participate in problem solving. One of the ways to best understand where you're going to be most helpful is to use the idea of friends from before. That's where the relationships we build before a crisis keep us working together through a crisis, even in ways we didn't expect to have to step up. It looks a lot like how all of New England's museums started donating the PPE that they had to healthcare workers. I saw Heritage Museum and Gardens stepping up. I saw Yale Art Museum, Harvard Art Museums, New England Aquarium, Wadsworth Atheneum, Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. I saw a whole barrage of folks donating their PPE. Surely there were many others. And ICA Boston ran a food bank, may still be running it. Outside of New England, Baltimore Museum of Industry had a drive-through testing station in a partnership with a health agency. Naples Botanical Garden did food distribution. Old Salem Village had a food bank and a bread kitchen and turned its ornamental gardens into victory gardens. And Little King Manor Museum in New York City started providing free essential supplies to women, something that is often overlooked, and conducted voter registration and census completion. That's where people were cooperating in ways they hadn't expected to. Now, I'm not in a museum as a staff member, so I don't have PPE to send, and I can't host a testing station in my parking lot. But in June, I organized the cultural sector to send a letter to Congress about recovery funds. And this slide shows 4 of the central topics, and then there are 3 on the next slide. I'll give you a chance to read those. This was a letter sent to Congress asking for a second recovery bill. It was signed by the presidents and CEO of ASLH, AAM, ACM, so Children's Museums, New England Museum Association, and California Association of Museums. Now, some of those directors had to come back to me and say that their board members asked why this letter wasn't just for money for museums. I explained that we are only going to find sufficient support to solve these complex problems if we work together. So that in keeping with the Friends from Before idea, the letter didn't ask for support for museums alone. Actually, none of the letters sent from across We Are Still In asked for just their own support. However, none actually managed a second recovery bill. But still, every member of Congress heard from the cultural sector on climate, health, equity, and economics. And they heard from us right alongside all the other folks they're used to hearing from. We stepped up, we took a new place at the negotiators table. And today, if you look at Joe Biden's transition page, the climate section has each of the concepts that are in this letter. It's not that we're prescient, and it's not necessarily that Joe read the letter, although Kamala might have. It's that this is how you address the problem as a nation. We don't do it just as a sector. Museums will be included in the future of our country when they work for everyone, not just for themselves. So the post-election postscript. One of the things Joe Biden will do on January 20th is restore our participation in the Paris Agreement. Well, when he does that, what is We Are Still In going to do about its name and its job? Well, its job is still to fulfill the goals of the Paris Agreement, whether we're in it or out of it. I will keep helping through We Are Still In and any other way I can. I will keep helping museums, zoos, gardens, aquariums, and historic sites do their jobs too. I'll help them to partner with the other sectors in We Are Still In, the tribes, the faith groups, the health groups, business, investors, and especially state and local government, every blessed sector around us to advance the things that create a thriving world. Whether it's for people, for species on the planet, but all so that we can all be healthy, economically sufficient, stable, safe, and valued. But the world has truly been changed by We Are Still In. When President Trump's plan to pull out of the Paris Agreement created the backlash that became We Are Still In, the folks at the UN in the Framework for Climate Change Convention, so UNFCCC, suddenly had to think about what it meant to have non-state actors in this effort. That means not the State Department, not the president. They really didn't know quite what to do about us because the United Nations is a union of nations, not subsector folks. But it's becoming more and more clear how much of an impact we're having. Right now, America's Pledge can document how the current carbon commitments from We Are Still In signatories can get the United States more than halfway to its goal of greenhouse gas reductions of 50% by 2030. And we can do that without a federal partner. Well, all the other countries looked at their own efforts and they realized that they too, even with engaged governments, they can't do this without the regular folks like us. Those countries and leaders and everyone else need what we offer. They need the science, the language, the history, the art. They need the gathering and exhibit spaces we have. They need our classrooms, our gardens, our landscapes, collections, our researchers, and our educators as part of the effort to help people connect to what's happening around them and what's coming in the future, to help them to cope, adapt, and overcome, to be successful, to be heard, to be joyful, to be included. On November 4th, the UNFCCC recognized this importance in a statement on the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. And this is how far we've come. If you look at the second paragraph in this, you'll see that the UN, Chile, France, Italy, and the UK say that they remain committed to working with all US stakeholders. There are 7 other climate action coalitions like we are still in around the world now. I expect them to show up in every single country. So whatever the new name is going to be, the work will be the same. Make climate action happen by working with every sector, with every person for the greater good. As expected by the Paris agreements, there will be a nationally determined contribution by the United States in 2021. The US cultural sector now has a seat at the crisis solving table, nationally and internationally. And based on what we've learned about dealing with these crises, we know what we have to offer. But we have to say it out loud and we have to keep repeating it. So if you're at a museum right now, the thing to do is to help it write its climate statement. And if you're not at a museum, please volunteer to write one with your favorite museum. And then put it on the front of the website and put it alongside the ethics statement and the equity statement. This is what it might look like. And if you, your board, your staff need help writing one, give me a call. I'll be more than happy to give you all the help that I can muster. So thanks for listening. Make a statement. Spread the word. So nice to be with you today. Thanks for coming.